Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. I think we're going to get started here. Drew, right here. Yeah. Well, first of all, welcome to Politics in a Pint. I am Alex Ritchie. I'm a student coordinator with the McCarthy Center. And the McCarthy Center values politics, and we help facilitate our love of politics with the students here through scholarships and through creative learning experiences, through study tours, Politics in a Pint being one of those. So thank you all for coming. I know it's busy here. Today, our topic is the Eurozone crisis. So it's great to see all of you here and interested in it. We have a few students with us today who went to Greece, who went to Rome, who went other places in Europe, who can talk a little bit about what they saw and what they see moving forward. So Politics in a Pint and the McCarthy Center, we really like student initiatives, and this is sort of my brainchild. So to get us introduced to the topic, we have a quick video here, and then I'm going to turn it over to the students to talk about what they saw, what they experienced. This is a laid-back atmosphere. If you have a question at any time, feel free to intervene. It's a little bit loud, so make sure to project a little bit, and hopefully you have a good time. Thank you.
And the rest of the world are coming to accept that it's already in trouble. It began with really the increasing level of debt of countries, of individuals in countries, of borrowers from banks, and in Greece's case and other countries in the European Union and the Eurozone, the debt became too high to sustain. Essentially, it's all about Greece at the moment and its slave debt. There are other countries that are in trouble too, but really the main architects of the euro and the euro's recovery are France and Germany. And of course, the real difficulty here is that they have been deemed to be seen as being slow in trying to get a rescue package for the future for the European Union and the Eurozone specifically, and the markets haven't been liking what they've seen so far. They say they want an agreement, they say they're working on it, particularly when it comes to shoring up the capitalization fund for the banks, but the markets have yet to be convinced. The difficulty for the Eurozone countries is that in order to continue to rail against debt and bail their countries out and to have a successful currency, it looks as though there might have to be greater tax and fiscal monetary policy agreement. And that is something that might not go down with member states who already believe they're suffering. And of course, the other issue is many taxpayers in Germany, for example, are extremely sceptical about putting their hands in their wallets again to bail out any other countries. The buzzword here is globalization. All our economies are tied, and the subprime mortgage crisis obviously was something that was an international issue, and essentially through globalization we're all tied and connected together, and we're connected together in the common issue of debt. It's essentially all about strengthening the banks and strengthening the European stability funds in order to avert potential future crises like the ones we've seen. And that really is where a lot of the discussion and the debate domestically within individual countries is centred on right now, for example, Germany. And really it is a question of political will versus the reaction of the markets, and whether the markets agree with what the governments finally decide to come up with.
push finally came to shove as we got to the end of World War II. And they realized in Europe that in terms of for the benefit of all of us, they developed and shared their economy. They integrate their economy as opposed to functioning as separate countries and separate economies. And so you had to
destroying each other. So it's not really helped after World War II.
Usually countries that tend to have a lot of trade with each other don't fight because they lose the gains of trade. And so what began in the late 1940s and through a process in the 1950s and 1960s was one of economic integration through a common market. They reduced trade barriers, lowered tariffs, removed quotas, and if they made progress in integrating their economies, the next obvious step, and they spent much of the 1990s putting in place the pieces to adopt a common currency, so that instead of having to worry about Italian lira, Greek drachmas, Spanish pesos, German marks, Dutch guilders, most of it, and having to worry about the exchange rates and what price is my good here in Germany, what price sell it in Italy versus Germany versus Greece. If we had a common currency, that question would go away. And so there was the move to adopt, and which they did in the early 2000, the euro. The formal euro here. And so, now, the problem is with that is that in adopting a common currency, each country had to give up their monetary autonomy. That they no longer would be able to control their own currency because they didn't have their own currency. They had a shared currency. And this requires a certain degree of economic coordination, particularly with regards to fiscal policy. And that was fiscal policy differences in government spending and tax policies, that largely are at the foundation of what the current situation is. From what was done in Germany versus what was being practiced in some of the other countries. Throw into that the economic crisis, 2007, 2008, 2009, whatever strains or whatever difficulties were, that crisis put and broke a lot of the relationships. And so we see what we have today. So the real mess that they're trying to sort out and solve. That's 4 minutes.
So roughly 422 million Europeans depend on the euro. And in addition to that, there are about 175 million other people around the world who have their currencies pegged to the euro. So the euro is an important thing. It's also the second most used reserve currency after the dollar. So if something happens, something bad happens to the euro, a lot of bad things happen to the rest of the world. That's it.
Good. I think now we're going to turn it over to a couple of students who traveled in Greece and in Italy and talk about their experiences, the protests they saw, how it affected their life personally. So Caitlin, if you want to talk a little bit about why you decided to go abroad, what interests you, and then how it affected
Can you have a show of hands of those people who have been to either Greece or to Italy? All right, so we have a sprinkling.
All right, my name is Caitlin Coleman. I studied abroad on a Greco-Roman trip this past fall. While I was there, it was actually really interesting. I was right in the turmoil. Literally, the moment I landed in Greece, right in the midst of things. There was a protest the very next day. Actually, that following weekend, we went to Ireland, and when we came back, we were using the transportation underground, the subway system, and we're coming up to the subway system, and we were walking through this cloud, and we're like, what is going on? This is all underground, and we're like, what is this? No one's in sight, and all of us start to immediately feel the effects of tear gas. So without our knowledge, we went through a tear gas situation, and it's just kind of interesting to see that as a member of a study abroad program, you really get immersed into the culture of where you're studying abroad. And then furthermore, on to what else I experienced, I member that I was with, Greg Walker, I don't know if any of you know him, he really wanted us to be safe, and he told us not to go. However, some of us did go to the protest, and I was one of them, so. Anyways, I remember standing on the edge of the protest and just being amazed at how riled up these citizens were. I remember seeing well, maybe not grandparents, but young, old, people in suits, people just, rags, it's just everyone, Greek citizen, came out to show their frustration, and it's really interesting to see, like, this isn't affecting a few people in Greece, this is affecting the majority. And then also, just my observations, some of the signs were yelling at the Germans, and I just thought that was really interesting. They said one sign that will always stick in my mind was, "Hey, Germany, pay us back for World War II." And I just thought that was really interesting. So anyways, while I'm standing on the outside of this protest, there was a huge clash between the police and the citizens. And the nice thing though is while I was there, I was never in any danger. The Greek people are very friendly. I actually was approached later on that week and was told, "No, you're not Greek." I kind of stuck out, and they said, "Please be safe." And I kind of took it as their sense, this isn't a spectator. We're not doing this. We're showing our frustration, so please respect us. Don't make this into a spectator sport. And so going off of that, I didn't vote anymore, but I can just see that it's going to be interesting in these times to come how these austerity measures are really affecting the Greek citizen, and I really am curious as how this will all pan out. Yeah.
Do you just want to kind of talk about how experiences were maybe similar or different in your take on what's happening in Europe?
Remember I too was in Roman Greece last semester, and I too experienced that in Greece, especially a lot in Rome. I was actually in Rome, Cleveland was in Greece, and I think that one of the most alarming things about the situation is in learning from our theology professor, Father Stephanos, who's actually in town right now. He said that when he started the congregation, this parish a few years ago, everybody was fine. There was a handful of people in poverty, and they didn't really have to help too much, intervene in too many people's finances. But within 5 years, he says now that they have to build a food shelf, and they can't keep food on the shelves. He said there's tons of people coming in to get food. Not only that, but they used to be able to help people with their finances in that they could go to the electric company and say, okay, this person's good for it, they'll pay you in a few months. He said they can't do that anymore because of the scale of people, or the number of people that are coming to them. I guess to go off of that, as a communications major, I'm always looking at the messages that are coming through the media. And what the Greek people feel is that, especially in the United States, but also in Greece, the way the media is portraying this disaster isn't exactly truthful to the people they feel. In that they're saying that the country's in flames, people are rioting all over the place, the country's in turmoil. And while there are episodes of that, it's in Trafalgar Square, and there are these square blocks where there's terrorists, pretty much, that the riot police will have to come in and throw tear gas at them. That doesn't speak for the whole picture. There's a lot more Greeks, a lot more Greeks that are just trying to make it by. It's really sad. People losing their jobs with the drop of a dime and not having any income. And they feel that the media is taking two people among an entire population, people that are being kind, people that are being reckless in protests, speaking for the whole thing. And that takes away from one of their bigger industries, which is tourism. Right now nobody wants to go there. I have a wonderful time, and I especially find the history of Greece very interesting. That's being lost among the protests and among the way the media is portrayed.
Just go ahead if you have a reaction or a question for any of the students. No. Well, I have a question maybe for the econ professors here. I know that the times are difficult, and it all seems to be traced back to sovereign debt. And I wanted to
think the problem with Greece is they've, well, for most of the European Union, the whole Eurozone crisis, this has mostly been the post-World War II where they've, where we've evolved in the Eurozone, where the nations are more socially involved. You know, there's more human services, like healthcare and whatnot, that are provided by the government, and they're guaranteeing more entitlements for their citizens. And over the last 50 years, I think it's just the entitlements have built up, and the revenue isn't keeping up with that. And so, granted, most countries have always had that, but it's just growing at such a faster pace that it's kind of just unsustainable between the taxes and what they owe.
I could just add a little bit, not only that, but debt has been relatively easy to acquire. The access to capital has been easy, it's been cheap. And as a result, countries that want to have a good lifestyle want to take advantage of that sort of easy access to credit. And so Greece spent way beyond their means. They kept on spending and they kept on financing it, but not just the Greece. There's a kind of a nasty acronym for a lot of these countries, the PIGS. So there's Portugal, Italy, and Ireland. So both of those guys in the same letter. There's Greece, and then there is Spain. So this is the group of relatively, iffy kind of countries with respect to their ability to pay back the debt that they've acquired.
Although compared to PIIS, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Spain, they were not having the deep debt problem as Greece. And Greece was exacerbated in part because the Greek government, the Greek bureaucrats, weren't fully honest in terms of what the size of the debt was. Their numbers were a little bit off.
Transparency was a little bit on the
Opaque side. It was less than transparent, translucent. We knew the debt was there, but nobody realized how bad it was until there was a closer examination of this, and that was what really sort of pushed the Greeks into more. But as I said before, the thing that in particular exacerbated the problem was that, if you go back and look at the data of 2005, 2006, and you can look at these countries, the PIGS, and say, oh yeah, they're a little bit on the high side relative to GDP, but it's still manageable as long as money is cheap. But as the financial crisis became global, in 2008, 2008, tax receipts fall off. Most countries are very dependent on income-related taxes, sales taxes, and so as tax receipts fall off, and pressures on the government to spend during a recession are pressed up, that just exacerbates the debt problem. Larger deficit, much as what we saw around here in the United States. We have a very large deficit. It's not so much because we've increased spending. In fact, quite the contrary, we worked very hard to cut spending. But the tax receipts have fallen off because the economy is operating so far below proportion.
So it's not just the tax receipts falling off, but also there's this little thing called tax evasion. I don't know if any of you who were there might address that. We might talk a little bit about that. Have people talked about it? All right.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the way taxes work there, as far as I understand, I mean, Greece get a bad rap for people get their laziness and pay their taxes and whatnot, but I've heard that if you have $100,000 of taxes to pay, you can pay $40,000 of them, pay $20,000 for the guy you're paying them to, and then the other 40 is just forgotten about. So it's horrible. It's to the tune of hundreds of millions of euros. I heard another story about some guy out on an island in Greece that was reporting something like 50,000 euros. Well, their IRS-like company organization out of the island found they had 25 different sports cars and was bringing in 2 million euros. So it's troubles like these, it's people that just taking money with them. Taxes. Tax evasion is very easy to do.
So just looking at a picture from a helicopter on various housing areas in Athens, there are houses with lovely pools. There are houses with lots of garages and so on. So if you actually started collecting taxes based on what you saw, probably get a hell of a lot more income from this. But you know, they also have ways of paying off tax collectors. Tax evasion is a problem in Greece. It's a problem in Italy, Spain as well. Although there seems to be a little bit more discipline there. I'm not sure about Portugal.
Do you find when you look at tax evasion that it's more prevalent in rural areas versus urban, or is it the entire country?
Well, I'll take the Northern European sort of prejudice and something like Angela Merkel. And the Germans in general would say, well, it's that Mediterranean problem. So it's Mediterranean. They're just a little on the slouchy side when it comes to collecting but it's, I don't know if there's a difference really between rural and urban. They're more wealthy individuals in cities, but they seem to be more taxation. Getting back just briefly to one of the things that you probably hear a lot about with regards to this Eurozone crisis is the debt to GDP ratio. So if there's one thing that you want to leave here with is a brief understanding of that ratio. It's just the amount of debt as a percentage of the overall level of income that the entire country produces. Greece's debt to GDP ratio is about 159%. I've seen different numbers, but it's in that general category. Pardon me. This is pretty much current as far as I can tell. And then Spain is somewhere around 66%. So even though Spain is in some trouble, it still seems to be in a better shape, let's say, with respect to the amount of debt as a percentage of its overall capacity to produce things in Greece. So, for instance, Germany is 81%. So they're fairly high. But what do we know about Germany? They can produce a lot, and they export a lot. They make a lot of money. So in a sense, they can withhold and yield a lot of that. Whereas Greece, not as much. They do a lot of importing. Boy, let's pray those tourists keep coming. And the programs from St. Ben's and St. John's keep coming because they need the income. So anyway, that's the kind of ratio to look at. The euro is a club, and you need to pay attention to certain rules in joining the club. One of those rules is that you shouldn't have that debt to GDP ratio higher than 60%. You notice about half the members of that club break that rule, including Germany, supposedly the big economic powerhouse. But you know, Germany can break the rules because, in a sense, Germany owns seven. So the Greeks they're kind of low on that total pole, and as a result, they're now being pushed to take that 159, roughly 160%, and push it down to about 120%. So this trouble will be with us for a while. This is the second big Greek bailout. There'll be a third. They're already talking about a third, and very likely there'll be a fourth. This is something that's a long-term process to get that debt to GDP ratio down to anything reasonable, maybe 100%. That's some issue.
You're a lot of talk about trying to make this that Greek. So why do we want to stay Greece? Why do we just have to go back to the drama? Because talking to a lot of Greek people, all of them would be fine with the drama. I don't really know why. I guess they feel that it's really because they're in such a bad situation now that that situation maybe should start over.
That's a great question. It's been asked all over Europe, and it comes up repeatedly. Anyone have any ideas or thoughts about why maybe Greece ought not to go back to the island? Yeah.
So I was just going to comment that one explanation for the massive increase in debt that I think has taken place over recent years, especially since the establishment of the euro, government to borrow and spend as much as it can. And when the purchasing power of the euro inevitably on net, that government will suffer less than the currency area as a whole, because there is give and take when it expands money supply. Eventually there's a lag in inflation that takes place, but if they can improve themselves enough resources through the expansion of the loan activity taking place in their country, that they gain. And so there's somewhat of an incentive to run higher deficits, I think, just due to the nature of the monetary system itself.
Well, the European Central Bank is also it's created a lot of too, and offered an awful lot of looking for some help. You were starting to get into some serious weeds there, real policy. Can anyone give any sort of a thought as to what happens if the euro goes away or collapses, or the Greeks decide if they voluntarily decide not to have the euro, or if they're pushed so gently, what would happen?
Kind of the way I think of it is like the game, I guess, asteroid over. Yeah, it's kind of like that. Whereas the one thread or break, it's like technical. With these, with the way the economy is now, especially with the way technology is integrated in economics, now there's so many different ties, so many different intricacies, so many different complexities to the finance systems of these countries that you need everyone in Europe to actually work.
The euro has something that's very important. It's got a solid reputation in the sense that there are other people that kind of give it a lot of credibility. What would happen if the euro were no longer available to the Greeks? Essentially, what do the Greeks need ultimately in order to be able to run the economy if they are spending more than they're taking in? Let's say they don't really tax as much, or can't effectively get the wealthy to pay more. They need loans. Here's a problem. So they no longer have the euro. They now have this new or neo-drachma. What do they do with that? Who wants it? Not too many people. They'd like some Greek salads, yes. But the neo-drachma doesn't.
I can get you to buy these neo-drachmas if I walk real. That's how you a lot of them for very small price.
Can I trust you to give me, or at least give me access to a currency
As
that I?
many as you want.
Yeah. How long will they last? Are they sort of like, is it sort of like sand in my hands that run right through my fingers and it will no longer be worth anything 3 weeks from now? For a little while.
Well, question, what happens, you were talking about a break of the euro, what if all their countries have to go back to their currencies like federals? Would that not be a possibility?
It's a thought that if Greece restructures and decides to go for the new euro, what happens to people's desire, or let's say concern, about the other little, what's called piggies, right? The Italians, the Spaniards, the Portuguese. Will there be additional pressure on those countries to let's say, establish sounder finance, which means more austerity, more paying off debt, less growth, and a downward spiral, so that those economies essentially are almost forced into bankruptcy. At least that's how they would view it.
I think,
But yeah.
I think the other challenge is that so much of the Greek debt is owed to France and Germany, which is why when ratings agencies have been downgrading Greece, they've been downgrading France and even Germany at the same time. And if you had something like the neo-drachma, where all of the euro-denominated Greek debt just went away, then you'd see a flood. I think the fear of the pigs and the complete collapse of the euro would become a self-fulfilling prophecy, because all of a sudden, all investors wouldn't want to hold euro bonds, so that they would just flood the market, and that's why Germany, which has a more conservative approach to fiscal and monetary policy, has been willing to spend so much money to bail out Greece, because they know at the end of the day, the first domino to fall will inevitably be followed by others.
Anyone see anyone playing dominoes in Greece? I've seen this tourist photo, so they know all about the dominoes, and the Europeans will know all about dominoes.
Yeah.
If all those banks begin to we have financial Armageddon, essentially. So that's one of the reasons why Greece might. By the way, the political system in Greece loves the idea that they have unfettered access to lots of loans. So going back to the drama means that the political parties in Greece will then once again have a bucket of cash that they can access, which they've done sort of traditionally. It's kind of a dysfunctional political system. Whoever can get access to the cash that the government has, they're the ones that so going back to the drama would be great for them, but once again, not very good for the populace.
Other than the tourism industry, what does Greece have that savings? I've heard it said before that in 2010, their exports actually increased by 13%. So among those aluminum, other, they have enough of those to get into this sort of want to invest there.
Unfortunately not. No, they have lots of islands and beautiful beaches and lovely sunshine. But I think as far as industry goes, they do a lot of importing. And by the way, that's another problem with the neo-drama, is that you now have this thing that's not worth very much, and you wouldn't be importing very much. So if your industry is now suited to import a lot of things from the rest of Europe, to have this relatively cheap, not very worthwhile currencies, it means that you no longer import as much as you did before. It would be a lot more expensive. So whatever industry there was might get strangled in the grip. Again, not very much to do. You know, that's what economists do. We put wet blankets on a lot of problems.
But that's the fact that if you have under the euro, Greece and everybody else in the Eurozone is sort of constrained to sharing a common price system denominated in euros. And that is sort of the price to pay for adopting and moving into the Eurozone. What you lose is, again, this monetary autonomy. But if you had your own currency in the situation that the Greeks are in, what would happen? What would otherwise happen is that they would have domestic inflation. This would serve to make that neo-rock would appreciate. That would make Greek exports relatively cheap, and they would be able to export more, admittedly importing less because the neo-rock wouldn't buy very much. It would be very expensive to buy imported goods. So staying in the Eurozone says that adjustment can occur. And so what has to happen, and this is why you get the rockets, is that you need to have wages and prices within the Eurozone that adjust down. Would you be willing to take a wage cut?
20%?
That kind of goes on, I was
That's what the
interested
Greeks recently had.
in your experience, whether, did people in Greece understand, accept that, life was going to have to fundamentally change? Because it seems like that is kind of necessary, and that's what these continuous austerity measures will mean, but I wonder if people can kind of come to that realization.
Under my own observations, I noticed that they weren't ready to change. They almost viewed it as their government's problem. So why should they, as a citizen, have to suffer what their government did? So I don't see them liking that idea very much. Oh yeah.
That's why we're going to bail out plan number 3, plan number 4, because at each point, I think collectively at least, the Greeks will start to realize, didn't quite realize it was that bad. So I guess maybe we'll chip a little bit more on our wages and our various entitlements to finally afford the lifestyle, for selling.
Are there any students here who were in any of the other European countries like Ireland?
I was in Ireland.
What did you observe economic, political
There was
discussion, you know, sort of what was the Irish take?
Well, where I was living, it was a relatively poor area, but all citizens in general they were very frustrated with what they call the Celtic tiger. So it was the rise and the boom, and things were growing. People were, you know, it looked like nothing could fail, and so they would, you know, they'd buy a house or a bigger house and expect to be able to pay it off. And when things crumbled, it really came crashing, especially in Ireland. And the Irish don't like to do what they're told. So part of the problem, and I think what's most of these conversations are centered around, are cultural ways of living. Ireland has had a long history with the English, been being around quite a bit, and they're viewing this, the way they're being told to change their policies, they don't really like it. So there's some resistance. There's also some understanding that things have to change, though. And I think generally the Irish tended to be a little bit more civil in regards to the changes than what I saw happening a few miles away in Greece and Italy. So maybe that's my perspective. I don't know, shooting it back to the people who were in Greece and Rome, if you thought that people were culturally not ready to change.
I would say that they were more civil than the media would have known. I'm sure. I mean, anywhere else you were in the world, it's not great television to show the people that are, sad in their homes, in ways, worrying. It's more interesting to show people protesting, being tear gas out of the city square. I think there's a lot to be said about how the media is portraying that.
I'm kind of curious, was there any talk of amongst the Greek people trying to capitalize on the fact that they have some great history and some tourism? Is there maybe an economic way that they could capitalize on that by renting an island to a country that promotes tourism? I mean, that's just off the top of my head, but is there a way that they could do that to benefit the
Acropolis. We've got weddings.
The tough thing with tourism is it doesn't really matter if Greece's economy is doing that well. They need a lot of tourism from other countries, so other countries need to be doing well economically. And within the last couple of years, the whole world's economy has been a bit of a downturn. So it's tough to keep the tourism up, especially when the Greeks can't really do anything to incentivize people to fly to Greece. So it's really dependent on the health of other economies. So until that recovers, then tourism is really going to shoot back to high levels.
Question for those people who went to Greece. Did some things seem cheaper for a while than other things? For instance, things that you have to import, that you have to buy from other parts of Europe, those kind of prices probably stay up fairly high because you have a high import cost. But some local services that maybe use local materials and local labor, those can afford to adjust somewhat, or at least there's a possibility of maybe a greater adjustment. Maybe people can substitute local materials for those that they import. But were there some things that seemed cheaper during this crisis? Meals, haircuts?
To be honest, actually, Italy was cheaper for me. However, in Greece, you do notice a lot of marble, and that is a natural resource, so that is cheaper there. But I don't have I didn't notice much else that it was cheaper for me. I don't know why.
My question, can I ask a question? Absolutely. Okay, we talked a lot about imports and exports, and when you hear a lot about the Eurozone crisis and what they're doing to solve it, it's all bailouts, when you hear about that. But my question is, are any of these countries taking steps to solve their trade deficits? You hear a lot about that with Germany. They can't make up this debt because they can't produce things and raise their GDP. Are they shifting their economies to fix that? Yeah. Because otherwise Germany sets the rules because they have the surplus, right? That's why Germany has so much leverage.
I can maybe start it off. Germany is in a very nice position. In fact, they'd be rather smug about their economy because they, after all, are very export-based. They have very nice, high-priced capital goods that they sell all over the world. So they've made a lot of money as India, as China continues to invest in their countries. The problem is that the world economy in general has slowed down a little bit more, and Germany's economy is now slowing down. And now they're looking around and saying, what's this? I'm not getting as much money as I used to. So they're a little concerned. It's hard, though, to shift your entire economy and say, boy, I've been importing a bunch of stuff. Now I'd like to really start exporting stuff. You can maybe think about that over time, but in the short run, it's really...
But isn't the crisis kind of within the euro itself? I mean, aren't they running, like Portugal, Italy, they're running trade deficits with Germany, you know? And I read about it the other day, and so I wonder, how do you fix that problem within itself? Can you? Or, you know, how do you make, doesn't Germany have to make sacrifices to them?
If Germany's sending them nice washing detergent, they might just have to decide that their local remedies are better than the imported variety, or they make those kinds of substitutions maybe in order to reduce the dependency on German imports. But on other things, like for example, if you have a power plant, it's got a German machine and it needs a replacement part, you can't use a rubber band as a substitute for that. So you need something else.
Well,
So maybe in the long run.
Yeah, and I think that China plays a huge role here. And countries like Greece have been kind of courting China because there actually a lot of the trade deficit is also Chinese goods. And so that's why the European Central Bank has been trying to get China to give some money to the stabilization fund, because ultimately if China's not exporting anymore to Europe, and particularly to, you know, Greece might not be their biggest client, but if the dominoes start to fall, that'll be a problem. So they're trying to get China to put some of its investment, to try and get China to put its investment into the stabilization fund to stabilize the value of the euro as kind of a way of saying, hey, you know what, you're actually helping contribute to this problem too, be part of the solution.
Yeah, how do you put the political pressure on them, you know? Because they don't buy it, you know, it hasn't worked so far.
But the political pressure is going to come from the fact that their economy is slowing down. And that's the most recent economic data says that's what's happening. And you know, if they have to have people to export to. So if the European economy collapses, they'll lose a really big export market. So
We also have to be careful a little bit about looking at pairwise country trade accounts within the Eurozone. I mean, that would be akin to say, looking at it and saying, oh my goodness, Minnesota runs a trade deficit with California and getting really excited about it without realizing, well, wait a minute, we might be running trade surpluses with the rest of the states, and we're using those surpluses to cover what is otherwise a pairwise trade deficit between us and another state. So it's one thing to sort of think about, okay, what are trading patterns within the Eurozone, and how are those being financed, and sort of, you know, is any region within Europe or within the Eurozone, in a particular country, are they running relative to their other Eurozone counterparts, are they in surplus or deficit? And then how are they financing? What is their trade pattern with countries outside of the Eurozone? Because it's very possible that you might be running a trade surplus, you know, outside of the zone and have a deficit in the zone, and that's how you're paying for it. So you just can't look at pairwise trading relationships. You need to sort of step back and look at, okay, what is their total trade balance? And that's where, you know, that's where you're going to have, I think, you know, the bigger global issues in terms of how are they financing, particularly now that they don't have control of their own money supply. That has been turned over to the European Central Bank, and that's largely under the control of the French and the Germans in terms of setting a particular policy.
The Greeks are even complaining that Germany controls the political system, suggesting when to have elections, what kind of a person would be good to have head of the government. They're a little touchy about that, especially since Germany occupied it for a while. By the way, there is good news. The good news is that Greece has been upgraded from default to B- on their bond ratings by Fitch.
the out-of-control deficit spending, would that have been possible if the natural checks and balances, at least the way I look at it, is if there was a commodity currency, you know, the outflow of gold would have prevented any such massive accumulation of this debt, and yet it seems that economists the world over are categorically against commodity currencies.
Whether they were on a gold standard or any other fixed exchange rate system, whether they were part of the euro or not, I mean, if a country persists in running a budget deficit of the magnitude and extent, with the idea that this could go on forever, you would have a crisis regardless. Whether you're dealing with the euro or whether you were dealing with a drachma or a neo-drachma. In the sense that, I sort of take a look at places like Zimbabwe, you wind up ultimately with hyperinflation destroys the currency. In the same way, that's what happened in Germany back after World War I and after World War II. That's why the Germans are so inflation phobic about, following any sort of loose monetary policy. That's why they're so adamant about austerity, is because if you do go to the extreme of having this sort of out of control fiscal deficit situation, mounting debt, eventually at some point your creditors are going to say enough, and they're going to look at it. Nobody will want to hold your money or use it.
But wouldn't the outflow of gold really bring the crisis to a head before you could have these sort of hyperinflationary effects?
No, not necessarily. Didn't stop it.
As they expanded the supply of the currency, right, prices would begin to go up. Yes, there was more currency competing with the same amount of real goods. But
you get a hyperinflationary
exchange that money, they would demand the gold reserves to be redeemed, and that's when you would have an outflow of gold from Greece until the gold reserves got to
they just keep
critical level, at which point they would stop expanding money.
Maybe this is something for a later discussion. Imagine everyone else may be gradually drifting away in different mental states in this discussion. So,
yeah. Well, a little bit. I'm going to admit it. But if you have any other questions for somebody who went to Europe or Greece or Rome, feel free to talk to us afterwards here. I want to thank everybody who showed up to participate, and thank you guys, because I know there's a lot going on campus. So, quick little plug from the McCarthy Center before you guys go off. We have our McCarthy residency next week, and as well as a student debate. The resident is John Cromie, who's a St. John's grad at 64, and he's done a lot of humanitarian aid around the world. He's going to be great. He's going to be open and available to students. So I would highly suggest that you use one of those opportunities to meet him, because you'll get a lot of benefit out of it. So with that, thank you for coming, and have a good rest of your day.